I'm Elena Vance, 31 years old, and I found out the truth about my father in my mother's coat closet on a Sunday afternoon in June. I had stopped by without calling, and before I could say a word, my mother grabbed my wrist, pulled me into the dark, and whispered the words I still hear at night. "Stay quiet and don't make a sound. If they know you're here, everything falls apart." She shut the door and left me standing among wool coats and winter boots. I didn't understand why I was hiding. Then I heard my uncle's voice in the living room say my name, and in the next 30 minutes I learned that my entire life had been built on a lie. What I did after that shattered our family forever. Welcome back to Lineage of Lies, where quiet people find their voice and the truth always finds its way to the table. If stories about family, courage, and standing your ground move you, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The closet smelled like cedar and old perfume. I pressed my eye to the crack in the door and watched my mother settle into the armchair across from my Uncle Robert, the man who managed the family trust. His voice was low and careful, the voice you use when you're closing a door you don't want anyone to open. "Does she suspect anything?" he asked. My mother shook her head. "Elena thinks Frank was her father. She's never questioned it. Why would she?" I stopped breathing. Frank Vance, the gentleman who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike, who died when I was 17, was not my father. The man I had mourned, whose name I carried, had been a fiction. I stayed frozen behind that door as my uncle laid out the real story. My biological father was a man named Dominic Hale, the black sheep of a wealthy family, who had died when I was an infant. His father, my actual grandfather, had set up a substantial trust for me, but only if I was raised as Dominic's legitimate daughter, and only if the family approved of my upbringing. My mother and uncle had decided decades ago that the money was safer if no one ever told me the truth. They had buried my real identity under a false one and collected the disbursements in secret, year after year, while I grew up thinking I was just an ordinary girl whose father had died young. "As long as she never finds out," Robert said, "the trust continues. She's the last heir. If she learns the truth and rejects the family, the money reverts to the estate. We lose everything." My mother's reply was so calm it made my skin cold. "She won't find out. She's never even heard the name Hale. She thinks her father's people died overseas." I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood. Everything I knew about myself had been a carefully managed lie, and I was hidden in a closet, listening to the managers. Let me back up, because you need to understand who I was before that closet. I'm an archivist. I spend my days organizing other people's histories, verifying documents, tracing provenance. I know how to spot a discrepancy, a date that doesn't match, a signature that looks wrong. And yet at home I had never questioned my own origin. My mother had always been a woman who controlled stories. When I was small, she'd rewrite uncomfortable memories. A fight became a misunderstanding. A missing relative became someone who'd moved away. I learned early that peace depended on never pushing too hard. Frank's death had been the one story we never touched. She'd said his family was gone, and I'd believed her because believing was easier than the silence that followed a question. Standing in that closet, I replayed every moment she'd dodged a question about my father's side of the family. And I understood I hadn't been protected. I'd been curated. The meeting in the living room ended with a reminder. The next family trustee review was in 3 weeks, at my cousin's engagement party. Robert would present the paperwork confirming my status as the obedient, unaware beneficiary. My mother would smile and nod, and the money would keep flowing. I waited until I heard the front door close and my mother go into the kitchen. Then I slipped out of the closet, out the back door, and into my car. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, shaking. The reflex to fold, to keep the peace, was screaming at me. But underneath it, something harder was forming. I drove home, opened my laptop, and began to do what archivists do. I started looking for Dominic Hale. It took me 2 days. Public records, archived newspapers, a genealogical database I used for work. Dominic Hale had been real. A brief, troubled life, a car accident at 26. His father, Arthur Hale, had been a minor industrialist who died 5 years ago, leaving a family trust that was supposed to be managed for the benefit of his only grandchild. Me. The trust documents were sealed, but I could see the outline. The money had been paying out regularly to a custodian. My mother. The lie wasn't just a story. It was a financial crime. I sat at my kitchen table at 3 in the morning with a legal pad and started writing down everything. The date of Dominic's death, 3 months before I was born. My birth certificate, listing Frank Vance as father, a man my mother hadn't even met until I was 2. The trust's public filings. Piece by piece, the fiction fell apart. And I realized I wasn't just angry. I was free. The lie that had shaped me was not me. I had a different name, a different bloodline, a different history. And someone owed me the truth. I called a lawyer first, a woman named Miriam Okonkwo who specialized in estate litigation. I told her what I'd overheard. She listened without interrupting, then asked for the documents I'd found. "Miss Vance," she said, "if what you're telling me is true, your mother and uncle have committed fraud. They've been misrepresenting your identity to a trust for decades. That's not just a family secret. That's a felony." I felt the world tilt. A felony. My mother, the woman who'd taught me to tie my shoes, facing a crime. But Miriam was gentle. She said I had choices. I could confront them privately, demand the truth and an accounting. Or I could let the legal process play out. I asked her what would happen if I did nothing. She said the trust would continue as is, the lie would outlive me, and I'd never know the people I belonged to. I looked at my birth certificate, the false father's name in neat type. And I made the call. We'd go public, but on my terms. I would face them at the engagement party, just as they planned to present their paperwork. But I'd bring my own. My mother called me the next week, and her voice was warm, the voice she used to smooth things over. "Elena, sweetheart, I've been meaning to talk to you about the family reunion. Cousin Julia's engagement is a big deal. Everyone will be there." I could hear the plan under her words. A big audience, a happy occasion, the perfect setting to reaffirm the lie in front of witnesses. I said it sounded lovely. I gave her no thread to pull. Then I went back to building my case. I did a DNA test through a commercial service and matched with a second cousin on the Hale side, a woman named Grace who had no idea I existed. We exchanged messages, and she sent me photographs of Dominic, of my grandfather Arthur, of a whole family tree I'd never seen. I had my father's eyes. I stared at that photograph for an hour. I wasn't just archiving someone else's history anymore. I was reclaiming my own. The party was at my aunt's house, a big white colonial with a tent in the backyard. I walked in wearing the calm I'd practiced in the mirror. My mother greeted me with a hug that felt like a cage. Robert was there, holding a leather portfolio. He gave me a curt nod, the kind you give a minor obstacle. When dessert was served, my uncle stood up and tapped his glass. "Before we toast the happy couple," he said, "I have a small bit of family business. Just a formality." He opened the portfolio and laid out the trust documents. He spoke about the Hale legacy, about the importance of lineage, about how grateful we all were that the family line continued so smoothly. He looked at me and smiled. "Elena, as the beneficiary, you just need to sign the acknowledgement that you've been kept informed of the trust's activities. It's all standard." He slid a paper toward me, a pen beside it. My mother beamed. The whole room watched. I looked at the paper, at the lie written in legal language. And I did not pick up the pen. "Before I sign anything," I said, and my voice was quiet but it carried, "I think everyone here should know who I actually am." My mother's smile froze. Robert's hand stopped halfway to his glass. I opened my bag and took out a slim folder. On top was the DNA match, the photographs, the birth records. My name is Elena Vance, but Frank Vance was not my father. My father was Dominic Hale. I found out 3 weeks ago, hiding in my mother's closet, listening to her and Uncle Robert discuss how to keep me in the dark so they could keep the trust money flowing. I set the first page down. This trust belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. And I've never been informed of a single cent. The silence was absolute. My mother's face went gray. Robert began to speak, but I kept going. I laid out the timeline, the fraud, the legal opinion from Miriam, the investigation that would follow. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just built the truth in front of them, one piece of paper at a time, until the story they'd told was in ashes and the real one was standing in its place. My mother reached for my hand. Elena, please, we were trying to protect you. The family was difficult. We didn't want you to get hurt. I pulled my hand back. You didn't protect me. You erased me and sold the empty space. The room was staring. Relatives I'd known my whole life looked at my mother, at Robert, at the papers on the table. Robert tried to gather the documents, but my cousin Julia, the bride-to-be, stepped forward and asked him to stop. She looked at me. Is this true? I nodded. She turned to her father. Dad, what did you do? That was the moment the lie cracked. Not in court, but in front of the people they'd tried so hard to fool. Robert's face crumpled. My mother started to cry, the kind of crying that asks for rescue. I didn't rescue her. I just stood there, an archivist who had found her own file. In the weeks after, the trust was audited. Robert was removed as trustee. My mother surrendered her role as custodian. The money that was mine came under my control, and I used some of it to meet the Hale side of my family, including Grace, who flew out to hug me at the airport. I didn't press criminal charges. I couldn't. My mother was still my mother, however broken the word had become. But she lost the right to manage my life, and she lost the audience that had believed her. The lineage of lies ended with me. I changed my legal name to Elena Hale Vance, carrying both truths. I still do archival work, but now I help others trace their own histories, the ones their families tried to bury. If there's one thing I learned hidden in that coat closet and standing up in that backyard tent, it's this. A lie about where you come from is a theft of who you are. Reclaiming your story isn't betrayal. Letting someone else write it is. That's how a whisper became a reckoning. A hidden daughter, a quiet archivist, an engagement party that exposed a fraud. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything, tell me in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Lineage of Lies, where quiet people find their voice and the truth always finds its way to the table.